Hello, my name is Paco Rivera, and this is the Maximum Sentence channel, where we discuss recent crimes and convictions. You can also follow me on Facebook for updates and more. There will be a link to my Facebook in the description below. On October 8th of this year, 2025, 50-year-old Sarah Jean Hartsfield was found guilty of murdering her fifth husband in the year 2023, and she was sentenced to life in prison. Sarah Hartsfield's fifth husband, Joseph Hartsfield, was 46 years old when it was determined that he died from an overdose of insulin, with the state concluding that the overdose was administered to him by his wife. Something that you should know, most of Sarah Hartsfield's ex-husbands have stated during interviews that they were lucky to have gotten out of their marriage alive. One husband spoke of how Sarah, after the divorce, tried to burn down his house while he was still in the house with his new wife. Another husband reported that Sarah Hartsfield had sent a hitman to kill his new wife, and a man that Sarah Hartsfield was engaged to marry, but he was trying to end the relationship, was shot and killed by Sarah Hartsfield in a case that she claimed was self-defense, and authorities believed her. Sarah Hartsfield was also accused by her older brother of burning down his house to the ground after their grandmother died and left the brother her entire estate that included the house. And because Sarah Hartsfield didn't get anything, she had apparently decided that the brother can't have it either. One more thing, Sarah Hartsfield had 4 children, all 4 from one of her marriages. And you should know that all of them, all her children, have disclosed being physically and mentally abused very badly for many years during childhood, and all 4 testified against her at her murder trial. I will briefly describe all of these events a bit later. Before I go on, in case any of you haven't noticed, in almost all my videos on my true crime channels, I typically refer to perpetrators of a crime by their last name or first and last name, while I refer to victims and others by their first name throughout most of the presentation. In this case, I will talk about today, even though Sarah Hartsfield didn't become a Hartsfield until she married her fifth husband, Joseph Hartsfield, I will be calling her Sarah Hartsfield, as she is known today, throughout the entire story, right from the beginning of her life. Once again, even though she wasn't a Hartsfield yet. That said, Sarah Hartsfield was born in Missouri in the year 1976. Like I said, she's 50 years old now while serving a life term in prison. By the time Sarah Hartsfield was a young teenager, her biological mother wanted nothing to do with her, and she was placed in foster care. She was then raised by her foster mother, a woman named Barbara Stewart, who would say in recent interviews that Sarah Hartsfield was a difficult teenager. Yeah, what teenager isn't? But Barbara said that she did her best with the young girl to provide a normal and stable life. Now, I do want to clear up some misinformation that has been circulating on social media about Sarah Hartsfield. There is a story about when she was about 14 years old, a younger biological brother who was about 10 years old was still living with with their biological mother, and he was out on the porch of the house where he lived with their mother, and he was playing with a dog leash. It appears he had placed the collar of the leash around his neck, maybe to pretend he was a dog. I don't know. But after he did that, he fell off the porch and was strangled to death. He died in this very unusual and bizarre accident, as was reported by authorities after the incident. So people on social media, after hearing all the horror stories about Sarah Hartsfield following the overdosing of her fifth husband, they were all posting messages about how she must have had something to do with the death of her brother too when she was a teenager. Sarah Hartsfield was no longer living with her biological mother when that incident happened. She was not there. She had nothing to do with it. Anyway, the boy was discovered by their biological mother when she went outside looking for him. By the way, while this other matter is totally unrelated to crimes committed by Sarah Hartsfield, it is interesting to note that police that responded to the scene of the boy's death made notations in their reports that the mother, Sarah's biological mother, did not show any emotions at all. She wasn't grieving. It was like she didn't care. Just so you know, in the end, the death of the young boy was ruled an accident. Back to Sarah Hartsfield. While attending high school in the year 1991, she was now about 15 years old, she met a student named Titus Knorrschild, and 2 years later, in 1993, the two high school sweethearts got married. Titus also had a really good friend who was actually his longtime best friend, a man named Michael Traxler. They spent a lot of time doing things together and hanging out often, and Michael Traxler would soon become a part of this story soon. Sarah's marriage with Titus lasted 3 years. There would come a time when Titus had learned of Sarah Hartsfield not being faithful. She was having multiple affairs with different men. And when Titus had decided that he had had enough, he informed his wife that he wanted a divorce. But Sarah Hartsfield didn't agree to a divorce, and according to Titus, she had even threatened to end his life if he tried to leave her. Regardless, 3 years after they married, now the year 1996, Titus made his move and he got away, and he was granted a divorce. But that didn't stop Sarah Hartsfield. She was continuously stalking him and calling him on the phone and showing up unannounced at his home. And this went on for quite some time, even after Titus remarried. Titus married a woman named Angela, who also found herself harassed by Sarah Hartsfield. Late one night, Titus and his wife were in the home when they suddenly smelled a strong odor of gasoline. One of them went outside and there were several gas containers scattered on the ground. And Titus saw that the walls of the house were all splashed with gasoline. The theory at the time was that whoever had splashed all that gas all over the house and had left containers on the ground must have heard them coming and fled before having a chance to light the house on fire. And Titus had no doubt at all in his mind who it was that was about to set his house on fire. He notified police and told them that it had to be his ex-wife. But he was also told that there was no proof of that and they couldn't do anything about it. So apparently, Sarah found another way to get revenge on Titus. She began to seduce his best friend, Michael Traxler. And it worked because Sarah Hartsfield and Michael Traxler, who was now in the Army, got married. Michael Traxler would become Sarah Hartsfield's second husband. Michael Traxler was stationed at Fort Hood in Texas, so she went to live with him there. It's not clear how Titus felt about Sarah Hartsfield marrying his best friend. If anything, he was probably more concerned with his friend's safety. But Titus did say that he was extremely relieved and grateful when his ex-wife moved far away from where he was living. Anyway, now in Texas, in the year 1996, Sarah Hartsfield was arrested for domestic violence when she assaulted her husband, Michael Traxler. However, that case was dismissed when Michael Traxler refused to press charges. He was probably terrified of her. But he did manage to end the relationship while he was still alive. The following year, 1997, Sarah Hartsfield, now 21 years old, decided to join the Army. Not so that she could be close to Michael Traxler, it appears that she was done with him. Many who knew Sarah Hartsfield personally found this, joining the Army, extremely unusual of her because she was always known to be someone who was always in control. She was always the boss, so to speak. Nobody tells her what to do. And by joining the Army, she's not going to be the one issuing orders, she's going to be the one getting them, which goes against everything people knew about her, but she did it. And she ended up doing well in the Army. staying with the military for 20 years and moving up in the ranks until she found herself being forced to retire for medical reasons. After joining the Army, she was stationed at Fort Wainwright in Fairbanks, Alaska, and while there, she met a man named Christopher Donahue. And 2 years later, in 1999, they got married. And this time, Sarah Hartsfield had the longest marriage of her lifetime, remaining with Christopher Donahue for 16 years. And they had 4 children together. Sarah Hartsfield would never have children with anyone else. In the year 2014, Sarah Hartsfield's biological grandmother passed away. Sarah Hartsfield's older brother, Cody Smith, had moved into the grandmother's home to care for her while she was sick and dying. Sarah Hartsfield did nothing to help her grandmother. So when the grandmother died, she left her entire estate to her grandson, Cody, with a house on the property located on quite a few acres. She left Cody everything and gave nothing to Sarah Hartsfield, something that infuriated Sarah Hartsfield. And I believe it was on the night following the funeral, if I got that right from the reports, that Cody arrived back home at his grandmother's property where he was now living and discovered that it was set on fire and burned to the ground. Cody knew exactly who set the fire. There was no doubt in his mind. And he sent Sarah Hartsfield a text message that read, "I'm still here. Whatever you tried didn't work." Once again, authorities were not able to press charges because there was no physical proof of who had set the fire. A year later, in 2015, after 16 years of marriage and 4 children later, the marriage to Christopher Donahue had gone downhill and they divorced. And it wouldn't be long before Sarah, now stationed at Fort Hood in Texas, met a man named David Bragg, who was actually in the Air Force, but he was doing work at the Fort Hood Army base where Sarah Hartsfield was stationed. The two quickly hit it off, and they began dating, and they became engaged. During that courtship, in the year 2017, Sarah Hartsfield began experiencing severe medical issues and was allowed a medical release from the Army. David Bragg, meanwhile, was having second thoughts about Sarah and her controlling personality, and he went to live in Garfield, Minnesota. Meanwhile, over the years, Sarah Hartsfield would become estranged from all 4 of her children. The 2 oldest were living permanently with their father, Christopher Donahue, and the 2 youngest were in a shared custody between Christopher Donahue and herself. Remember, all 4 children would later testify for the prosecution against their mother in her murder trial, mostly about the abuse they had suffered at the hands of their mother while growing up. The man, still engaged to Sarah Hartsfield, David Bragg, had apparently begun to realize that there was something a bit off with Sarah Hartsfield, and he went to live in Garfield, Minnesota, possibly hoping to be far enough away from Sarah Hartsfield in Texas that she won't bother him. But he was wrong. Sarah Hartsfield was making regular trips to Garfield, Minnesota, and every time she arrived at the home of David Bragg, she would bring a load of her stuff with her and move it into his house. David Bragg, according to his family, was trying to find a way to break off the relationship, and that he had told Sarah Hartsfield to stop moving all her stuff into his house. And there came a time when he told her that she must move all her things out. This led to Sarah Hartsfield one day in 2017 arriving at the home of David Bragg in her car with her 2 youngest children in the car. They happened to be with her at that time. Sarah had 2 guns in the car, so she tucked one into the back waist of her pants and she put the other one in a pocket. Just to skip ahead for a moment, when Sarah Hartsfield was later asked by investigators why she went into the house with 2 guns, she would say that she didn't want to leave any guns in the car with 2 young children in the car. To be honest, I do find that as a very reasonable explanation. Anyway, Sarah Hartsfield would also say that she went into the house and that moments later she and David Bragg got into a very heated argument that ended up turning physical. She said there was a struggle between the two of them and that David managed to get a hold of one of the guns that she had on her and that he fired a shot that accidentally missed her and ended up going up into the ceiling. Afraid for her life, Sarah Hartsfield said that she grabbed the other gun that she had been carrying and she shot David. That single shot, by the way, went right into his heart. So Sarah Hartsfield claimed that it was self-defense. And apparently, believe it or not, the state believed her story and couldn't really find a way to contradict it, and she was not charged with any crime. Anyway, Sarah Hartsfield, after killing her fiancé, she finished moving all the rest of her stuff into the house of the dead man, and she remained living there with two of her children during the time that she had custody of them. And she would end up meeting another David, a man named David George. And just 6 months after killing David Bragg, 6 months later, in the year 2018, Sarah Hartsfield and David George got married. And he moved into the home where his new wife had recently killed a man. Can this story get any crazier? Now, this was a strange relationship. David George would later admit that he was in love with Sarah Hartsfield, almost to the point of being obsessed with her, but that he was also terrified of her, especially if he did not do what she asked. And just 3 years after the marriage, in the year 2021, Sarah Hartsfield had become furious because her third husband, Christopher Donahue, the man she had been married to for 16 years and had 4 children with, had gotten remarried. Why would she care about that? Anyway, in 2021, Sarah gave her fourth husband orders. She ordered him to drive to Arizona, where her third husband, Christopher, was now living, and that he must kill Christopher's new wife. She had it all planned out. She got David a black car and handed him a gun. She told him to get some flowers and deliver it to the house, to Christopher's wife, and then shoot her dead. He was also told that he was not allowed to return home until he had done what he was instructed to do. So David George began to do as he was told. He arrived at Christopher's house in Arizona with flowers and rang the doorbell. It was Christopher who answered the door. When Christopher asked about a card for the flowers, David George said he will go check if it's in his car, but he left. Now, it appears David George had communicated what happened back to Sarah Hartsfield, and she was furious that her husband had not completed the murder of Christopher's new wife. And he was told once again that he cannot come home until it's done. And it appears that one of Christopher's children staying with Sarah Hartsfield had overheard the conversation, and that child would later call her father and say, "Hey, Dad, just so you know, Mommy sent her husband David to your house with flowers, and he was supposed to kill your new wife." That's when Christopher notified authorities, and the FBI got involved because this was now a multi-state murder plot being reported. Well, one would think, okay, Sarah Hartsfield is busted now. So the fourth husband, David George, who was supposed to kill the third husband's wife, was questioned, and at first he had confessed to the entire murder plot. When Sarah Hartsfield was questioned, she denied everything and said that her husband had made up the whole story. And when David George was questioned again, he retracted everything he had said. He was now saying that he had made up the entire story about being ordered by his wife to kill anyone. It's obvious that he was terrified, and that's why he changed his story. Anyway, once again, authorities were unable to charge Sarah Hartsfield with the murder for hire conspiracy, with David George now saying that it didn't happen. However, a judge in Arizona wasn't liking this whole situation and decided to grant Christopher Donahue full custody of all 4 children and that Sarah Hartsfield had to stay away from them from now on. Sarah Hartsfield was so angry about the whole thing that she kept her promise to her 4th husband, David George, and did not allow him back in the house, and she divorced him. About a year later, in the year 2022, Sarah Hartsfield was spending a lot of time on Facebook, something that she had been doing for quite some time. And while on Facebook, she met a man named Joseph Hartsfield. Yes, they met on Facebook. And they later agreed to meet in person, and they fell in love. And just 3 months later, they got married. Joseph Hartsfield had 2 children of his own, no longer living with him, and he had diabetes. Joseph had been a diabetic for about 20 years, and he was required to take a medication called insulin if his glucose levels, sugar in his blood, had gotten too high. And as is the case with most diabetics, if his glucose levels gets too low, he might drink some juice or eat some jam, and that will take care of the problem. According to Joseph Hartsfield's mother and Joseph's oldest daughter, as well as an uncle, Joseph had discussed with all of them at separate times, sometime around December of the year 2022, that he wanted to get out of the marriage with Sarah Hartsfield and that he had begun to make plans to get out. He had also said that he was in fear of his life ending by staying married to that woman. And sure enough, a couple weeks later, it appeared that Sarah Hartsfield was aware that Joseph was trying to end the relationship. And beginning on January 6th, now of the year 2023, he was in bed for more than 20 hours while his glucose levels were dropping to dangerously low levels. Now, Joseph wore a monitor that would alert his cell phone and his wife's, Sarah Hartsfield's, cell phone whenever his glucose levels were way off. And Sarah Hartsfield was getting those alerts. And according to detectives that investigated this case, they concluded that she was ignoring those alerts. Finally, about 20 hours after the problem began, on the morning of January 7th, 2023, Sarah Hartsfield got paramedics to transport Joseph to Methodist Baytown Hospital in Houston, Texas. For the next 8 days, doctors and hospital staff were trying desperately to get Joseph's glucose level back up, but it remained critically low, no matter how hard they tried to get it to go up. And on the 8th day after being admitted on January 15th, 2023, with his wife, Sarah Hartsfield, seen on video beside him, she is seen and heard weeping and sobbing, Joseph Hartsfield died. Now, some hospital staff had become suspicious of the possibility of foul play because there was no reason that they could think of why the treatments were not working. So they notified authorities. During an autopsy, the medical examiner concluded that Joseph Hartsfield had died from toxic insulin exposure. In other words, he was pumped with an overload of insulin, the medication used to lower glucose levels when it gets too high. So, no wonder everything the hospital tried didn't work. Anyway, so the ME was able to determine the cause of death, but not a manner of death, which would be suicide, homicide, or accidental, but that it was definitely one of those 3. And that is now up to investigators to determine which one. When Sarah Hartsfield's home was searched, crime scene technicians found about 10 used EpiPens of insulin beside the bed that Joseph had slept in. By the way, Sarah Hartsfield did admit that they did not sleep in the same bed. She slept in another bed in another room. Following searches of Sarah Hartsfield's laptop and cell phone, there was enough evidence there to conclude that not only had she exhibited a careless disregard of Joseph's medical condition while he was laid out unconscious in bed, that she had also injected all the insulin into his body while he was knocked out. On her computer, they found a Google search where she asked, "Can too much insulin cause a stroke?" While Sarah Hartsfield had said that she was asleep during most of the 20 hours that her husband was critical, her cell phone activity showed a totally different story. Asleep for 20 hours? Her cell phone showed that she was quite active the entire time on social media, texting and even ordering food from a market. It showed that she was also getting those very serious danger alerts from Joseph's glucose monitor and that she had ignored them because she didn't do anything about it. It should also be noted that while Joseph was hospitalized, while still alive, per se, investigators learned that Sarah Hartsfield was making inquiries regarding a life insurance policy on the life of her husband while he was officially still alive. Sarah Hartsfield, throughout the trial and to this day, insists that she is innocent, that Joseph must have injected himself with all that insulin. The jury did not buy it, and I think most people who know her history did not buy it. Please go ahead and hit the subscribe button for more of these true crime stories so that you're alerted when the next one comes out. You can also follow me on Facebook for updates. There will be a link to my Facebook in the description below. My name is Paco Rivera. Thank you for watching. Take care and bye for now.